Welcome to the Legal Advice in Paradise podcast, brought to you by www.legaladviceinparadise.com. Even in one of the most beautiful places in the world, life can be litigious. On this podcast, the best and brightest legal minds gather to help you navigate your way through every legal question you may face. This program will help you know your rights, know what steps to take, and help you find the best legal representation, all in simple, easy to understand terms. And now, here's your host, Justine Gronwald.
Aloha, Agents of Change. This is Justine Gronwald with Legal Advice in Paradise, and today we have our Witness Wednesday guest, and her name is BELEZA HIGA.
Hello out there. Hi, Justine. Thanks for having me.
Yes, and I just want to give you a little background of how we first met. Actually, we met a long time ago. I was the office manager for a real estate land sales company, and we needed a telemarketer, and Beliza was working for us. She was like the telemarketing pro. So our years later, our paths have crossed again, and I'm so glad because I brought her on because if you remember the episode with Peter Carlisle, we talk about victims of domestic violence, and the purpose behind Witness Wednesday is to bring resources to people. The show's purpose is of course to bring you what you can do in a legal situation, who to go to, questions to ask, but also there's people who are affected by some of the shows that we bring. Peter Carlisle's episode brought up the fact that if you find yourself in a situation where you need help, in this case domestic violence, or some of the resources that he gave me was a domestic violence action center, and those of you who are a member got all the resource numbers in your email. If you're not a member, you'll find a way to join later on in the show. We talked about TROs, we talked about victim witness assistance and the Hawaii State Coalition Against Domestic Violence. But the reason I brought Beliza over is that she actually took action and took advantage of going to that shelter. Now, I want to share a little bit of story about myself. I went through domestic violence as well, but I was too chicken to go. I called the women's shelter, and I had this preconceived idea that, I talked to the woman, but I had this preconceived idea that I'm going to be in there with these wayward women, and it's going to be a room full of cots and, maybe perhaps drug addicts, and I wasn't a drug addict. I just had all these preconceived ideas, and I imagine that I'm not alone, that there's some people out there, maybe you, somebody you know who's going through it, who are too afraid to take advantage of these resources. So I wanted to bring somebody on the show who actually went ahead, took advantage of it, and how it benefited her. And Beliza just came in the nick of time to fill that spot for Witness Wednesday. So I'm just going to give it to Beliza now and have her tell you her story.
Thank you. And I like to touch on that word that Justine used, afraid. So I was living in fear already. So when I made that phone call, the fear on the other end was much more tolerable than the fear I was in. For me, my abuse was more verbal abuse. I had came from out of an addiction to prescription narcotics that I was addicted to for many, many years. And I was 2 years into sobriety. Yet my husband would still bring up the past. And so whenever we got into disagreements, he would say, oh, do you want to go drink now? Are you going to go take a pill now? And I had no way to respond to it healthy. I didn't know how to respond, so I reacted, which would turn into not so much physical altercations, but more verbal abuse in front of our child. And she was 5 years old at that time.
And let me just interject here. People think abuse is only violence, and we know already that it can be mental and verbal as well. Just take a little bit of that part of verbal and mental, because a lot of us think it's the hitting, but it's not just the hitting. Describe to us the mental. I went through it too, but for you, describe what it did to you, your self-esteem and your self-worth and all that stuff.
Okay. For me, I was coming out of a place where I no longer had anything to mask the pain. So when my husband would say to me, "Oh, you're nothing but an alcoholic, or you're nothing but a drug addict. You're never gonna change. You're never gonna amount to nothing. You don't appreciate what I do for you." Those things to me hurt me as a person, as a mom, as a woman, and I couldn't see bruises on physically, but if I could describe what was going on inside, is things were breaking, and it was I was unable to see the damage until there came a point where he would get so verbally violent with me that it would start with F words and swearing, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, the neighbors are hearing them, saying, what kind of woman am I? Here the husband comes home from work and the woman is at home. What is she doing that she's at home? So shame started to come upon me, because I'm like, I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm being a good wife. I'm at home taking care of our children, and you come home shouting. And so it was shame and humiliation. And so once again, being that I was going to celebrate recovery, which is, they have it at Inspire Church Monday nights at 7 o'clock. There's 18 different classes. I was learning about recovery and the steps to take to stay sober. So one of them was setting boundaries. So I was thinking to myself, I don't need to take this abuse anymore. I knew it was abuse.
That's
And
good that you recognize
I
it.
knew it was abuse. So I looked on the computer for hotlines for domestic violence.
Yeah, back when I did it, back in the mid 90s, we didn't have so much computers. I actually looked through the yellow pages.
Yeah. This was blessed that there was.
But I'm the one that chickened out on going.
I went because I got tired of being sick and tired. I got tired of being picked on and being abused. Yes, I wasn't being hit physically, but I was being hit emotionally and mentally.
And you were trying your best to stay sober for,
Yeah.
for yourself and the family.
Absolutely.
And he didn't know that he was shooting himself in the foot.
Well, actually,
doing
he
it.
was like almost provoking me. So what, you're gonna go drink now? And I knew I had no choice. I could not go drink anymore because I'm in recovery. So it was like I just needed to get out of here. And there are times, I'm going to admit, there was a time where it could have got physical, but he started breaking things in the house. And so I got on the phone to call the police, and I pretended I was calling the police, but he left, and I found myself nailing windows shut. Jamming pencils in doors.
That's fear.
So that he can't get back in with the key. Taking what are those extension cords and tying the doors shut.
Oh my goodness.
So yes, I was afraid because things were starting to escalate.
It could have gotten physical.
It got physical in the past, way back in the beginning of our relationship, way in the beginning. But this time, I knew that I didn't deserve it. And I knew I wasn't going to expose
But you never deserve it. I think women and anybody out there needs to know that it's never acceptable.
Right. But when I was in my sickness, I didn't know that. You see, because I was in addiction, so I figure, okay, I'm a drug addict, so I deserve to be told that I'm a drug addict. I deserve to be told I'm an alcoholic. But when I got sober, it was like, okay, I don't have a problem anymore with substance abuse. Something's wrong here, and I need help. And I no longer saw my home as a shelter. I no longer saw my home as a safe place. So that's
when you went ahead.
I called the shelter. That it's called Domestic Violence Hotline. Okay. So I called.
Yeah, the domestic violence. Peter Carlisle went ahead and gave me that resource, and we'll put that resource in there to all the members in the email that goes along with this episode. But go ahead. Don't
be intimidated. Be honest with them, because they're there to help you, and they want to help you. And when I went there, I went to 2 shelters. The first one, I wasn't really serious. I went there as maybe to say, okay, I can leave you. But the second shelter I went to, I was serious. And when I walked in, it was on the windward side, and it was beautiful because there were other children there. And as I was sharing with Justine earlier, when I saw my 5-year-old smile, I knew that we were going to be okay.
It was the right decision.
It was the right decision.
So let me
Yeah.
see. We talked about my preconceived ideas, and I know a lot of women probably did the same, because in my head, like I said, thought I was going to walk into this big old shelter with cots all lined up, and they're just going to throw you on a cot. Just describe to me what you found there.
It was when you first walk in, there's like an office, so it's like an intake place that's where they do all the legal paperwork. They have to register you. But as you go further in, it's a home. There's a living room, there's a kitchen, there's bedrooms, there's a bathroom. It was a home. There were other women that were going through what I was going through at different levels, and a lot more children. I only had one. There were some women that had 3 to 4 children.
Wow, so these women bring all their children.
Oh, yes.
Have to, right?
They bring their children, and there's rules. So your children have to be, because structure is needed. You have to rebuild that structure again. So your children have to be in bed, fed, bathed, clothed, read a book to them, and have them in bed,
Wow,
which was
that's
my
good.
opportunity to step into the living room area. And there were other women there, and I looked to the side and I saw a book, and it's titled The Crazy Makers in Your Life. And I read that book from front to back in one sitting.
Now you have a picture of that.
I do.
For the audience who are watching the video portion of this, we're just going to show you a cover of the book. And while you're getting that together, tell us how you were impacted by that book. You read it.
I saw my husband. I read what my husband was doing to me.
He was in those pages, you said.
He was in the pages.
Yeah. Can you see that?
Can you see
So
that?
so for those who are watching the video portion, that's what it looks like. You can find it on Amazon or just Google it. And again, what's the title of that?
Dealing with the Crazy Makers in Your Life.
And who's the author?
The author is Dr. David Hawkins.
Okay, cool.
And can you read that right there? I don't
Yeah.
have my glasses.
It says setting boundaries on unhealthy relationships. So setting boundaries is so important.
So what I learned is that I had a right to say, you cannot speak to me that way. That you do not have a right to bring up my past, because I have no recourse. What happened, and I'm getting better. So it's no longer going to work. So I was empowered. I got knowledge. So it was like a bait. When you go fishing, you put a little shrimp on it or whatnot, you throw it in the ocean, and you try to bait the fish. Well, my husband was baiting me, and
Like a challenge to your addiction.
to my addiction. And yet, as much as he wanted me sober, it was easier to keep the light on me, the addict, than focus on his own anger issues. So once I started getting clean and sober, he had to realize he was no longer my hero, he was no longer my rescuer. That not that I didn't need him in my life, because I need my husband, but I didn't need a fixer anymore. And so I think he lost his role.
Right,
in
right.
his
So
life.
there's a dynamic that goes on with sobriety, which people have to be aware of, that it will not be the same again, but for the better. But when people have to go through any kind of change, it's not always easy.
Yeah.
And even if they know it's good change, it's still change. So tell us, how long did you stay in that women's shelter?
I stayed in the shelter for 3 days. We were going through the intake process where we started filling out paperwork, and they were offering me tons of services, from if I needed to get a TRO, if I needed a bus pass, if we had medical, if we had finances,
Wow.
if we wanted to get on the Section 8 waiting list. I mean, there was a wealth of information, resources coming at me, and I was a little bit overwhelmed, because I was like, wow, I wish they knew this earlier.
Yeah, and that's why I wanted you on this show, because like I said, I chickened out. I thought, I don't need to be a part of that. I'm just going to handle this. And I talked to Peter Carlisle about how, because I didn't go, I've slept in my car on the beach. I've slept in my bathrobe on the side of the road, just to prevent myself from going back home. That's not the right thing to do. There is help. So I'm glad that you're telling us now. If I had known back then, but you know, so be it. Now we can affect other people and have them go forward for help. So
Absolutely.
the resources that they gave you, did you take advantage of further what they gave you?
The only resource that I felt I needed at that time was that book. So I asked them if I could please have the book. I would return it if I needed to. Of course, not at the same home, but to the Domestic Violence Center. And I took the book home and I suggested that my husband read it because I told him that now he needs help. I'm going to stay focused on being sober. I love my husband enough to stay in the marriage that we're going to work it out, but that he needed help because he had some issues and that he had no right to bring up my past anymore. And we're both, and makes it easier is that we're both people of faith. My husband and I both serve God, and we know that Jesus Christ needs to be the foundation of our marriage.
Exactly.
And so with that being said, the road has not been without challenge because there's times where we've had to meet with the pastor of our church because we don't see eye to eye on certain issues. But it's no longer where it gets violent and out
That's
of
good.
control.
That's good.
Fear is no longer present. I've got going to that shelter empowered me because guess what? If ever I need to, I can pack up my daughter and I could go and the resources would be available.
Well, let me ask you, what year was this that you went and took advantage of that?
2009.
So it's been a while.
Yes.
And
yes.
from those 3 days alone, can you tell us how it really, and it looks like it was a impactful and positive direction that it sent you, but tell us.
There was a class that I went to.
Yeah?
There was a class there, and it was, they handed out a sheet of paper to every woman, and it was called the Cinderella Story. And I honestly cannot verbatim remember, but it was about the cycle of abuse. And it's the different stages.
Yeah, I bring it up
on.
in, if any
Yes.
of you have listened to the Peter Carlisle episode, please go back or contact us at Justine at Legal Advice in Paradise, and I'll send you the link to the Peter Carlisle episode. I talk about the cycle of abuse, but I'll let Beliza go ahead and expound on that.
It starts off with that honeymoon stage
Exactly.
where everything is really nice and everything's really calm, and then stressful situations come up, and then they escalate and they get really bad, and then it gets almost criminal because now you have abuse going on physically, and for my case it was emotionally and mentally, but it can get physical too, and hefty charges come across that. So police get called, and we do have stay away orders now.
Right.
So you can
we
have,
covered that
yes.
where you need to be away for 48 hours.
Right, and then you have the man come
Time
back
out.
to the window within 3 hours saying,
yeah, you
let
mentioned
let me
that.
back in, or the woman coming back, let me back in, I'm sorry, I won't do it again, and I love you, and I need you, and I want you. So then you come right back up to the honeymoon stage. So you never really,
cycle.
yes, you never really deal with the underlying issue of how can it get so out of control that we have to hit each other or hurt each other, or in my case, defend myself. Why did I need to defend myself? Why?
Especially when you're trying to work on yourself for the better.
Yeah.
You know.
But that book, for me, that book helped a lot. And if it wasn't for that domestic violence shelter, I would not have come across that book. And I have recommended that book many, many years. I'm finally, what is wonderful is through this also, I had a cleaning business. I opened up my own cleaning business.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you. That afforded me the opportunity to work at a beautiful resort, that experience. So I am now self-sufficient, still in my marriage, loving my husband, bringing
Fantastic.
something to the table. So I have income to bring, and we just purchased this last summer our second home. So things are going well, but always go back to your tools. The shelters will give you tools. They will give you tools. They will also tell you to always have a bag packed. Always have
Wow.
money, at least $10, $20 money packed
Wow.
away. An extra set of clothes. Because you can't always, sometimes you can't even get to your car,
Yeah, I want to tell you an instance where I was blocked from my car. I was not allowed in my car to go. So that's just part of my story about, how a man. Now, we talked about how women can abuse men, but in our cases it was men. How I, got into a situation, he would not let me leave. He blocked my car physically, and I couldn't get away. So it happens, you know.
True, and we back then you could run to the neighbors, knock on a door, can I use your phone? But now we're living in where you don't want to open your door to even someone saying they're from the electric company. So it's important that you have it. You have your bag packed. You have something, and of course you're not going to keep it in the house. Keep it somewhere outside in the garage. You know, safely ziplock it or in a trash bag in case you do need to get away.
Can you go over that list of exactly what you should have in there? It's just like for emergency.
Yeah, well, bus fare has gone up, right? So you at least have $20 on you.
Okay.
And if that's for bus money, if you need it. If you have definitely an extra identification, even if it's expired, at least it's an identification with your name and your picture on it. If you can have change of clothes, at least 1 day's change of clothes, a bottle of water, because it's exhausting.
Oh,
And,
yeah. I walked
you know,
home. After I got blocked from my car, I walked home in the hot sun.
You need to have
And,
a bottle of water.
What about for your kids? So you should
Exactly.
also
So
have
that's
for,
true.
have
If
for
you
your
have
kids.
children, make sure you have clothes for them, at least a set of clothes, because sometimes you're not always going to be able to get into the shelter that night. And maybe you're going to find yourself like Justine, sleeping not so much in your car, but on the side of the road, at the park, at the beach, you know. It's important to let somebody know what is going on.
So you should have a backup person. What about the people who feel they can't turn to anyone out of shame and fear? What would you say?
There's no shame. Shame is when they're going to read about you in the headlines that your body's found somewhere, or that they see you with a black eye and they're going to say, come, you never came to us. That's when it's shame, is when you exposing your children to this day after day and you're not telling someone what's really going on. That's shame, because you're stealing from your family, from your children, the right to see what it's like to be brought up in a healthy home. I mean, everyone's going to go through conflict, but when it starts getting violent to where it's criminal, you need to let somebody know, hey, if you don't hear from me in 2 days, if you don't know where I'm at in 2 days, I mean, I would say just 24 hours, call and check up on me and make sure I'm okay, because I'm not in a perfect marriage or relationship right now. And it's not that you're afraid for your life, but things could get out of control. Always let someone know, can you check up on me, especially when you see things escalating, when you're in that stage where you're not at the honeymoon anymore.
It's starting to turn.
You're in a cycle where it's starting to turn bad. Another thing is if the person that's abusing you is on drugs.
Yeah, they're not even in the right state of mind.
Absolutely. They not always going to think, but that's where a lot of homicides, you know, are happening now. A lot of suicide deaths are happening, murder, suicide.
Right.
It's serious. The things that are out there in the streets today that are being ingested, whether it be smoking it or taking it by mouth or drinking it, you know, people are doing crazy things now, and your life is on the line. The agencies that Justine has talked to you about, and Mr. Carlisle, take advantage of it. Don't be afraid. Go there. You can always leave. It's not jail. They're not going to say, okay, once you're here, you got to stay, and we're going to tell everybody. No, go there. See if it's for you, because it may not be for you. And like for me, I just needed that book, and I got knowledge. And from that knowledge, you know, fast forward to 2014, I know now that when things are brought up, that I don't have to receive them, I don't have to hear them, and it doesn't have to turn into a fight, you know. So I learned tools. I can just step away.
So at the shelter, they afford you places to go to learn new skills?
Oh, absolutely. They even offer you a bus pass. Which did I mention that? They offer you a bus pass.
That's
they
amazing.
offer, if you're single mom, and of course they're going to go according to your income if you're married. So in my case, I was married. But if you're not married, they do have grants for you if you want to go to school, if you want to go to college. You're allowed to go to school from there. They have curfew, so you do have to be back at a certain time. If you do have a job, they'll afford you to still go to work. But the main thing is protection. A lot of these shelters too, you cannot tell anybody where you're at. It's very important to keep it private, because there are women that are there that are hiding for their life because they have been threatened. And so with that being said, you will be told that at the intake that you are to tell no one where you're at or where you're staying at.
That's good. That's good. That makes people feel a lot more secure. So with that, there are myths about domestic violence, and thank you for this resource. I'm just gonna point out some things about the myth of domestic violence, and that's myth one. Domestic violence happens in low-income families or people with substance abuse problems, or only to people who grew up in a violent family. The truth is, our middle and upper income families may be suffering as well. Their secrets are better kept, and the shame and embarrassment is so great it silences victims from coming forward. If the general beliefs is that this thing only happens to poor victims, minority people, substance abusers, how can a wealthier person admit this is happening in their own families or those they know? The stakes are high and the risks are great for people with public profiles and economic resources. And so for those of you out there who are going through this and you don't fall into the low income, still these resources are equally for you as well.
Absolutely, absolutely, and even more so because you yourself can contribute. You know, there's ways that you can give back once you get to that shelter and you get the help that you need, because you have a certain amount of, let's say, financial, maybe you can give back to help support, because they do sponsor. A lot of it is not for profit, so you'll be able to give back, when you see the freedom and the liberty after being there and learning the tools, that you may want to come back and say, hey, you helped me, now I want to give back to you. So don't be afraid, because your resources that you have, even in your dysfunction, what's going on in your home, you can give back to these shelters that's so needed.
That's a good point. That's a good point. Now here's myth number two. It couldn't be that bad if the couple stays together or the victim returns to the abusive partner. In short, you often hear, why does she stay with him? Well, that applied to me. Why doesn't the abused person act, report the abuse, leave the abusive situation? Fear. And we talked about fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of retribution, all kinds of fear will immobilize an abused person. Leaving is statistically the time of greatest danger. The threats abused persons have heard from abusers are enough to keep them uncertain. Will they be in worse danger? Will they be hurt again or more? Will they lose their children? Will they be penniless, homeless, and dependent on the charity or goodwill of others? Will they be shamed? The shame of admitting we are not the capable, talented people we want people to think we are. The shame of not being happy in our own families and homes. So me too, it's like, then why are you staying with this person? They actually point at the victim and make them feel bad,
right? I think that when as you were reading that, my mind was thinking of so many different things. Number one is denial. Don't deny that it hurts. It hurts. It hurts to get hit. It hurts to get yelled at. It hurts to get called names, and it hurts to live that way. When you reach out for help, that's empowering. Your children will not get taken away from you if you're reaching out for help. But if you continue subjecting them to this violence, I mean, who knows how it could escalate and what could happen, to where they may not get taken away from you. They may run from you. I mean, they may not want to be in this hostile environment. Children are educated now at school about what's right and what's wrong, and they may be the one going to the counselor saying, hey, my mom or dad's being hit. They hit each other, and then you'll have involuntarily people getting involved in your business. Go and reach for help now while these agencies still have money that they can still help, because there's some places that the agencies are no longer in operation because of the funding. They're still available. We have people in office that are pushing for it. There's good fundings that are being made available. We have the people we vote into office that I was just sharing with her, where they had just passed bills about the 24-hour stay away, from my notes here.
We brought that up in Peter Carlisle's episode about having the timeout of 48 hours.
Right, and I don't have my glasses on, but it says here requires a no contact period by the abuser, Class C felony if abuse takes place before a family member under the age of 14. So you see, we have laws in place now that were not in place before.
That's good. That's good.
Yeah.
And let me go over this third myth. Why do you only help women? It says here that the Domestic Violence Action Center do take male clients. We help anyone and everyone that have been assessed as a victim in an intimate partner relationship. Although there are certainly cases of men abused by women and men abused by other men, the overwhelming majority of cases are of women abused by the men. So
Either way, abuse is abuse, and
it's never acceptable.
we have abuse rates for animals, we have abuse rates for humans. There are resources out there, and that's what Justine wants to do, is make you folks aware that there are resources. And I'm one person who's going to raise my hand and say, no shame, I called, I went, and I left with much more than I expected in such a fast, I mean, like I said, I was only there for 3 days, but that was enough for me to know that this doesn't have to go on, it can end. And it was with me not coming home screaming and abusing my husband, but saying simply, read this book, because I think you need some help too with your anger. And from there,
And the two of you came a long way, and you shared with me. I said, Beliza, does your husband mind you talking about him? And you told me that prior to us coming together today, he said something very special that touched your heart and touched mine. So do you mind sharing that?
Yeah, well, he grabbed my hands as I was getting ready. He grabbed my hands and he said, Beliza, I told you God told me not to give up on you, and that he would use you one day to speak. And today is one of those days. And so he gave me his blessings. There's no shame in doing things wrong. In fact, it's empowering and liberating to know that in our sickness, we were able to get help. And today we're healed, and we have we've been married since 2000. We've been together since 1995. So going on, 20 years?
Yeah, it's been a long
it's
time.
a journey, and together we've learned, and it's not perfect, but it's no longer violent, and that's what's important. Is that this domestic violence shelter afforded me the opportunity for shelter that night, because I needed shelter, because it was just either I was gonna go back into addiction, either I was gonna go back into addiction, or I was gonna get violent myself. Like we were joking earlier, not a coolie girls.
Oh yeah,
you know, we can
you
troll
want to challenge
too,
me,
but that's not the answer.
Yeah,
That's not
yeah.
the answer. The answer are found at these places, because these people are trained professionals. They've studied, and they do care.
And they've been in that, according to Peter, some of them have been in that same situation of abuse.
Absolutely. And it's and that's the reason why we're doing what we do today. I mean, you, Justine, and for myself, I became a volunteer guardian ad litem, where I advocate for children that are in the foster care system. I'm the voice for them when we go to court, and what we want to do is make sure safety is important. Safety is important.
And Peter Carlisle talked about the effects that the kids are going to watch this violence, and typically they just model what we do, and they're going to do it and bring it into their relationship. I always say this: people think just because you turn 18, you're an adult. It's a lifelong journey. You're going to take what you learned as a youngster and bring it into your future relationships. And my idea is, we have full empathy for that, because a lot of us have grown up that way. However, it's the individual's responsibility to turn that around, not only for themselves, but for the future generation of their kids. If your kids are witnessing you going through this abuse, if you stand strong and make a change, just any little change, they will see your effort, and perhaps that'll plant a seed in them to say, hey, this is not right. They can break the chain.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Being a woman of faith, the terminology that I'm familiar with is called generational curses. So it's a learned behavior. You don't come out of the womb fighting. You do come out of the womb needing to be nurtured, to be fed, to be taken care of, to be protected. And as you grow up, you are brought up in environments, and it's a learned behavior. You will model.
Yes.
You will model what you saw. So until somebody decides to say, "Hey, that's not right," you're not gonna find anything wrong with it yourself either. You know, you're gonna think, well, that's what my mom used to do to my dad, or that's what my dad used to do to my mom, or that's how my parents did it. Violence is violence, and it's not right. It's illegal. You cannot do that. It's criminal, and it's not healthy. And humans do not deserve to be abused in any way at all.
And let me just say this, you know, hitting is not love.
No.
Don't let the abuser tell you it's your fault, because that's what I was told. It said, no, it's Justine, it's your fault. You made me hit you. And guess what? I believed it. And I'm like saying, I'm so sorry, I'll never do it again. It's not true.
Yeah.
Don't believe that. That love is not hitting. Love is understanding, patience. People need to know that. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the resources of this, but let me just give the number for the Domestic Violence Action Center, the crisis support. The legal helpline is 531-3771. But I will also post the resources in the email that goes to all our Agent of Change members. And if you're not an Agent of Change member, you simply just have to text your name and email to area code 808-670-3400, and you'll be put on the list to get these episodes automatically. And in our emails to you, we'll have all the resources. So I just want to thank you so much for being, and you know, it's not easy to share, but once we understand that by sharing it'll help others, then it's, you know, it's really easy to share, because you don't want anybody else to go through the same thing. So again, thank you, Beliza.
Thank you for having me.
And
thank
then
you. Thank you.
We just thank you for stepping up and also being a volunteer in what you do to help abused children. And if anybody has any questions for Beliza that you want me to relate to her, you can always write to us at Justine@Legal Advice in Paradise. And with that, we're going to say thank you for listening in this episode. And we hope that it has helped anyone of you out there. And until next time, we'll say aloha.
Aloha.
And thank you for tuning in.
Thank you for listening to the Legal Advice in Paradise podcast. For more information, visit www.legaladviceinparadise.com.